to be steering you on a journey over these past weeks. We are taking you on a trip. We're calling this our roadmap series. And today we're going to be focused on the topic of shifting workplace culture. We're finding, and we'd love to hear what you think, that workplace culture is changing. And some of those changes are happening through external pressures or things that are, being put on us from the outside. Other things are demanding that we change from the inside out. So whether or not you're choosing to change, often right now, what we're finding is that workplace culture is changing due to multiple pressures that are being put on it. So how do you be intentional about that? And this is part of our roadmap series. So it's a point along the way. We've been talking over the past weeks about the many ways that you can take a workplace culture assessment, both working with organizations and with individual team members. And how do you use those and bring them to life to bring value to your business? CultureTalk, if you're new to our conversation, is a platform that enables you to make culture a tangible business tool. So no dust gathering on these assessments we're going to share with you. They are actionable and they are brought to life through a common framework called storytelling. And you'll hear us reference these patterns, these story patterns, every time we talk about this culture work. And that's because they are kind of with us for the journey. Whether or not we measure them, archetype patterns are present. They're there. And so we're going to take a look at how does knowing about those patterns and what they represent and the behaviors, attitudes, and beliefs, sort of those underlying drivers, how does knowing those things support you in being successful in your business goals? And so we're going to look at how do you use those things to shift cultures today.
Yeah, right. I love that you're even starting with patterns, Teresa, because, a lot of different change can feel, or culture shift can feel like a big, overwhelming type of initiative. There are a lot of different change models that sometimes I think you need a PhD to read and understand, right? Like we bring in a consultant to develop some kind of change plan, and then they leave behind something that, what do we do with this? And I think that the process that we teach at CultureTalk and what we kind of want to talk about today, in relation to culture shift, is what you said about patterns. Like culture is it's a repeating set of patterns. And so when we think about change, one of the change principles that we think about are, what are the patterns that are existing today in our culture? And because they are the patterns, like by nature, they're like habitual things, right? They're things we
repeat,
think
right.
about. There are things that, are on autopilot, if you will. And so one of the change principles that we really think about, we want to simplify change. We don't want a big, complex process that people can't understand or get involved in. And so one of the change principles—
Or they get distracted and with good intention, they start out, and over time, priorities shift, and that big change initiative starts to gather dust.
Yeah, or feel like I don't have time for this. So we want in a change program to really think about, what are those patterns? What are those repeating patterns? How do we drive the experience of change? We talk sometimes about change sometimes is the leader standing up in front of the room, clapping their hands and cheering everybody on. And it takes so much energy to get the room enlivened. But really, how do we shift out of that kind of a paradigm and into a paradigm where the individuals that are part of an organization want to participate. They're leaning in. They're forming maybe more one of those like waves that you see at a sporting event where everybody's like, oh yes, it's my turn. This is how I participate, and this is what I bring when I show up fully. So even in thinking and setting the stage here for talking about culture change, recognizing that we need a change process that is human, that is easy to play along with, that's easy to understand, and that gets everybody involved in understanding what their role is.
Right. Sometimes we refer to that as the sticky factor.
Mm-hmm.
So if you have a complex model that takes a PhD to interpret and apply, it's hard to make that sticky, no matter how effective it might be. It's the longevity and the consistent application of sticky ideas that help us to shift the patterns. So if we're looking to change the culture, we're essentially looking to say, well, what is the current pattern and where do we want to go? What's the vision for where we want to change, what we want to see, and how do we get that stickiness that encourages and supports people to come along, play their part?
Yeah. I'll add to that, a lot of change initiatives, people get very focused on communicating what's changing, how is it changing, and it's kind of directive, in terms of, we are communicating about it, but we don't yet on an individual level feel like a part of it. And, culture, for all the different ways that we could describe organizational culture, it is so much more connected to how people feel about the organization. Do they feel connected? Do they feel aligned? And that's a shift we're seeing is employees wanting this alignment with who they are, what their personal stories and motivations are, and how do those align with their organization. So let's talk, Teresa, about one side of the equation being how do we help how do we use story patterns to help organizations shift their culture? And then how do we get individuals into the conversation and looking at what they need to do and how they need to change?
Yeah. Right. So the way that we do that at CultureTalk is we actually measure what patterns are prevalent.
Can you do that?
It's hard sometimes, right? Because if you don't have a clear framework for this nebulous topic, it can be like trying to, see the water that you're swimming in. We often reference a fish bowl and say like, well, that fish doesn't know that water it's swimming in. It's just there. It's just ubiquitous. It's all around them. So it's hard to recognize it. So yes, we actually can measure the story patterns that are happening on repeat. And when we do that and go through a validation experience around it, we can have a conversation about it. And I think that primarily that is probably the most critical aspect of this. How do we have a conversation about something that feels intangible?
Mm-hmm.
And so having a common language and a framework and measuring against that framework allows us to all of a sudden begin, connecting through deeper, more meaningful, more impactful conversations. And we can say, hey, we like this pattern. This is where it came from. Here's a story, multiple stories of the way it shows up for us and how it's effective. Mm. We can also then identify, well, and here's the problem that we're experiencing due to that same pattern. Mm. So now we're having a conversation. The reason we can have it is because we've measured it and because we have a common language and we're talking about it in a productive way.
Yeah,
we often bat at each other and we, because we're really not getting to a clear place of what are the underlying drivers. But when we have that framework, we understand the underlying drivers. Our conversation is more meaningful. It's productive. Now we're beginning to see the needle begin to shift.
And I want to just comment. We're talking patterns, but what we're talking about are story patterns. We call them archetypes. There are 12 that we use in the measurement system we use at CultureTalk. And what we see when an organization measures the culture patterns through archetypes is that it provides a very foundational grounding to a culture shift conversation. There's without that measurement system, without that language, we are stuck kind of talking about surface experiences of culture. Right. We're saying, oh, we like it, we don't like it, it's good, it's bad. And the truth is that there is no right culture. There is the culture that exists here that's been created through everything we've done to date. And when we can measure it and identify, what's working, what's not working, now we have something. Not only can we talk about it, we can create an action and a strategy around more of what is working. How do we address the gaps? How do we address the shortcomings of this same experience? And we're all in the same conversation.
Right. And, back to the roadmap, we can put a point B on the map and say, we're going here.
Right.
But instead of just sort of like a big, wild, inspirational speech, like you talked about the rock star, we're going here, and get everybody all excited, but not give them a plan for how to get there. When you identify what patterns are missing, where those gaps are, and where the company or the organization needs to go, you can also lay out some clear plan for getting there. So what actions, what outcomes, what attitudes and behaviors would look like the desired culture, the place we want to, act from. So we can not only say what's not working, but we have a direction that we can work toward.
Yeah. Let me bring up an example of an organization in the Northeast of the United States where there was some challenges with external challenges for the organization. They were around for a long time. They were successful. And then suddenly there was all some external pressures and some new competitors in their space. And the culture was just going along in the same pattern it had always gone along in. But the CEO and the president of the organization was like, oh my God, we can't keep doing the same things we're doing because, and he's struggling. He's rock starring and he's trying to figure out, how do I get these people to think differently? How do I get my team to engage around a different pattern? And so one of our CultureTalk partners was working with this organization, and they went in and they measured what are
those patterns, right,
that are here. Mm-hmm. And one of the patterns that they measured was a pattern we call innocent. And when innocent exists in an organizational workplace culture, there are a lot of positives to that pattern. Some of the positives are this feeling of optimism, of hope, this idea that things always work out in the end, that we just, we have like, here are our values and we're going to keep working in alignment with our values.
Right, and real, talking about an organization that actually lives their values, right? So one of the real positives is when a lot of organizations use the term integrity, it feels kind of like it falls a little flat. But in an innocent organization, integrity is a lived experience, and we can measure that.
And because there is integrity and there is positivity, we just kind of trust, right? There's it's a culture of high trust. So that was one of the patterns that got measured. The downside to that pattern, or what we would call the shadow tendency of that same pattern, is that there can be some naivete. There can be some glass is always half full and an unwillingness to look at what's not working, right?
There's an unwillingness. It's almost like a blinders on, right? Inability to see what's not working.
Right. We have kind of this rose-colored view of the organization, and we don't want to upset the apple cart, right? We don't want to, and so forth. So this particular organization struggling and pattern
losing market share, poor financial, Did I lose you, Cynthia? Or did you lose
Yeah,
me?
for a minute. I wasn't sure if it was you or me. Hold on. Teresa.
Carry on.
Are you here? Teresa, are you here? Hello?
Hi. I'm not sure what happens.
My internet went down entirely. So I don't know if you kept talking without me or if I was stuck with one of those crazy.
I thought it was my internet. So I was trying to switch over. So at any rate, I think we're still broadcasting. I don't know where we dropped off, but I think we were chatting about, we were just about to go into the challenges of the innocent archetype pattern.
Right. Yeah. So just identifying the pattern of innocent helped this consultant and the leadership team in this organization figure out what the gaps were, right? Like why an innocent pattern is very content where things are and how things are being done. They're very family oriented. They're very work-life balanced. And so while those are strengths, those things were getting in the way of being able to compete in an entirely new market, right?
Yeah. So, hard to light a fire, right? Hard to get people to react with urgency and, understand that there's some threat.
Yeah, but the first step was really measuring the patterns and identifying what are those behaviors. And now we know which behaviors we actually need to shift. And so just an example on an organizational level, they've been doing some culture shift work over the past 2 to 3 years, right through the pandemic and beyond. And they've gotten really intentional and deliberate about what aspects of innocent do they want to maintain and how do we introduce some more hunger, some more competitiveness, some more innovation, some more, that might come out of other archetype patterns. So,
right.
Right.
So getting clarity about, I liked what you brought up there about what to focus on, what to shift. And I think understanding why people might resist or have trouble with that is really important as well. Because I think what we also see a lot of times is companies can say, well, we need to create this, but if they don't ever measure what are the underlying motivators and drivers that they have, telling people to change doesn't generally work. Like, you change.
Right. So how do we put it down to the individual?
How do we get down to the individual level, right? And I think that's where you get to that wave where somebody recognizes, well, not only do I need to respond to this organizational goal and need to shift, but I've got to figure out how I play a role, how the way that I tend to show up maybe I add something really important to this equation and now's my time to shine. And I just figured out like where to plug my own drive, energy, ideas into the needs of the organization. And one of the ways that you can be particularly effective is if when you measure those organizational patterns, you also measure the individual against that same framework. So we use the CultureTalk for Individuals assessment to help individuals understand, how do I fit into this picture? What are the ways in which I might, be part of the problem? And what kind of support do I need? And what are the ways in which I could actually drive some of the change we're looking to create?
Yeah. It's interesting because change in and of itself can be sort of a fearful, it can be a stress inducing time if you're an employee in an organization that's going through change.
Yeah. So Cynthia, we have a question coming in over LinkedIn here. Soledad is asking, what experience can we share about subcultures in a big organization? And I think that's a really great question.
Okay.
So
I'll hold the thought I was about to say, but go back to the organizational culture. And thanks for the question, Sol. In an organization, when we're doing that kind of initial baseline culture assessment and we are measuring the patterns in the organization, we're actually also able to add different demographic question sets if we want to compare between different groups in an organization. So for example, if you're at a very large organization, maybe you sense that there's different cultural dynamics at play within different departments, or with leaders versus non-leaders, or with different locations, if your company has different locations. And so when we add a demographic question set, what we're able to see are group by group, are there different subcultures at play? What is the overall cultural experience? And if we break it down, is there some differences between finance and IT and marketing and the executive office, where people in those subgroups are having different experiences of what it's like, what the water's like that we're swimming in.
Right.
And that's really powerful.
I think that the reasons, some of the reasons that could happen are different leaders for a particular subculture or group. It could be different deliverables, things that they're responsible for. Like, we know that there are a number of things that create the crucible in which the culture forms, and different departments are going to have different, things that add into that. So the finance people have a different way of thinking, different tasks and outputs, and different pressures on their positions. Maybe the sales team are operating with a completely different set of parameters. So while we're in the larger organization together, it's helpful and important to understand that we're not all reacting from the same set of underlying drivers or motivators. Being able to pull that into the conversation and the equation is really helpful as well, because we see a lot of conflict potentially arising between groups who make broad assumptions about the other group. And when you understand that they're operating from a different cultural perspective, we can communicate, just that alone allows people to take the communication down to a level where we're actually sharing real information, we're actually communicating. Whereas many times we're just kind of batting at things, and rising levels of frustration close our ears even more.
And it allows us to get to a much greater level of specificity in terms of, Department A and Department B really being able to uncover what are the behavioral things at play that are causing potentially tensions as well. Trying to come along for this culture shift, is that tension, is that interdepartmental or any kind of subgroup tension getting in the way of our success, and how do we plan for that?
Yeah, I'll give you another example of that. I think we might have talked about this last week as well, but in a tech organization that had acquired another firm to broaden their expertise. So they acquired another firm who, on the face of it, should have been a very good addition, because the complementary, services that they provided kind of went arm in arm, but couldn't figure out why they were struggling so hard to go to market together. Only to find out when we did the organizational assessment and took a look at those demographics, how did this office play and how did the new office play, to find out that the difference between the lover and the expectation that they had and the sage were creating a really, important aspect of tension between the two offices. And literally just uncovering that and recognizing that the lover is based on trust and relationship and, having kind of a one-on-one sense of, I'll support you, I'll give you whatever you need. And the sage sits back and waits and says, I don't even have enough information. No, never mind that, conversation, that connection you're looking to create. Give me information, give me data. I need data before we can even talk. So just coming at things from a very different perspective, two departments within the same organization. How are we going to merge this and operate more seamlessly by understanding which of these patterns are at play in each different location?
This starts to point to what needs to shift. What needs to shift, and how do we find some common ground or create some agreements about which is going to work and who needs to shift to get there. I want to go back to the point I was making on the individual level related to change, and the idea that change in and of itself can be stressful, right? When changes are coming, people kind of get on edge a little bit in terms of, how is this going to affect me? Is this going to be good for me or not good for me? And we often see that in moments of stress, archetype patterns, our own story patterns, start to shift into the shadow expression, right? So when we help individuals develop awareness around what are my patterns, what are my story patterns, I immediately can see, I'm shifting into a part of my pattern that is not serving where this group is trying to go. I've shifted into an aspect where I feel the walls going up and resistance going up, and my behavior becomes something that is not conducive to moving the team forward. So it's a really, we see this a lot on, I'll give an example of a leader. One of our consultants was working with they're working with the whole team, and the leader had come out with a high ruler hero pattern. And during one of the work sessions related to individual story and storytelling, this leader got a little bit quiet, pulled back a little bit, felt a little bit like, not comfortable. And later, after reflecting, what they were starting to see was that the change experience was putting such stress on them as a leader that they were bringing to the conversation aspects of themselves that are shadow-based and fear-based. And so it became a real opportunity for this coach to work with that leader in terms of, okay, there's a lot of great things in a ruler hero pattern that need to come forth in order to facilitate this change and to give people confidence about where we're going and that we can get there together, and that inspiration. And so it was the opportunity for that leader to have a shift on an individual level that created this new level of success for that team shift.
Yeah. And it's those layers, right? When we think about culture shift, it really does have to start at the individual level, but we have to be moving towards something in unison. We have to be moving toward a bigger vision, a bigger goal together, so that we're not all, deciding, what looks good for me, what sounds like a good place, a good outcome for what I'm trying to create. So it's tricky. And there are layers to it. And yet what we find is that when you really get down to the individual level and bring people along through that, you can experience just much greater levels of engagement and success.
So
we have another question here, as a follow-up here from Sol. How much time in our experience to achieve a complete culture change adaptation? For example, move to a customer-focused culture for a retail business? 1 year, 2 years, more?
I was just about to say that, the process that we've been describing here is something that can unfold over months with a number of different, very targeted initiatives. But it is also the kind of process that deepens over years. And I think it is, a little bit unrealistic to think of the kind of shifts that we're talking about as like black and white and like turn them off and turn them on. We're going to behave this way because we're human, and human beings take time to internalize. They take time to begin to develop awareness. It takes time to practice a new set of skills. And so I think you can see some immediate impacts because now we are all in the conversation. We're in the same conversation. The framework is loaning itself to being in the same conversation. But it's really like what happens, it is a year later, like, wow, look at how this entire experience is shifting and getting more aligned.
Yeah, and I would add to that, one of the things that we talk about, in fact, we often reference 5 principles, and 2 of them really play into this question. One of them is scale, and the next is sustain. And when you talk about the stickiness of actually making the shift happen and sticking with it over time, I think that scaling, which says we're not just going to, take this on from the top down, we're going to seed it into the different, activities and expectations and programs and policies within our organization. And so the ability to really inseminate the culture and the organization, many different approaches and ways to, deepen the connection to the culture patterns and the outcomes that you're looking for. So that's the scaling of it, right? We have to really look at what are the ways that we can deepen the exposure and the connectivity for the individual.
Yeah, right.
And then the sustaining is once you've done that, you have to stick at it, right? So in order to actually have that long-term, deepening of it, we need to find ways to recognize that it's happening, reward that it's happening, and continue to engage individuals in the conversation. It's not like a once and done. Hey, take this assessment. Oh, great. Here are your patterns. Wasn't that a nice experience? And then it goes on the shelf.
Right.
It really is about now I need someone to coach me to those patterns. I need those patterns to be brought up and embedded into my professional development plan. Mm-hmm. I need someone to hold me accountable to action plans and commitments that I make against what I've learned. And all of that gets tied to what the organization has learned about itself. So that integration and intertwining of what the individual activities are and what the organizational level activities are is important to, really seeing that change. And I think the good news is we really do see that change. We really do experience that deepening and people over time just continuing to revisit what they've learned and their sense of connection to that new place we're going. So
let's close on this too. The time required for really lasting change should not be a detractor from embarking on the journey, because the alternative is every 6 months, we're going to try something new. We're going to try something new. We're going to try something new. And now you've got like this change that just is, it's unmanageable, right? And people very, very suspicious about, oh, here we go again. Right.
And you're sort of stuck in the same place. I like to compare it to going on a diet,
Oh, okay. I haven't heard this.
Explain it's going to take all this time, but if you don't do it, you'll be exactly where you are 6 months from now. Still.
And you'll be picking a new diet. You'll be starting a new program. And that is the perfect analogy for what I was expressing. So thanks for that.
Yeah.
Teresa and I are also excited to announce that our next CultureTalk certification class is coming right up in September for those of us in this, part of the world that's back to school time. It's a great time to kind of get reinvigorated. Our certification program is an 8-week online program. There's Zoom classes with kind of small cohorts of experts in different angles of workplace culture. Each of our sessions is 2 hours with a little bit of homework in between to kind of integrate what you're learning. So if you're looking for a tool set and you're looking for an approach to culture change, culture shift, culture transformation that has that stickiness and that staying power and that level of depth, and you want to bring that into your company or clients, we're happy to chat with you. Drop us a line, reach out. You can also learn about the program on culturetalk.com/certification. So until next week, we're closing out August here. So thanks for joining us, and we'll see you soon.
We'll see you soon.